Hey, Rosalind, you can start.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to tonight's town hall discussion on leading change for 2020 and beyond, technology, economics, and opportunities. My name is Rosalina Bray. I am the National Society of Black Engineers Public Policy SIG Director, and I'm very excited to be the presenter on tonight. The Public Policy SIG for NSBE, our mission is to study, discuss, educate, and advise on public policy issues that are affecting Black engineers and scientists in academia, industry, government, and public communities. So through this discussion, we want to provide some insight into how policies affect change, and more so how individuals within this space who are educating themselves, performing in different aspects of technology, science, and engineering, and who are also working in the workplace or aspiring to be entrepreneurs, can understand how changes happening in the next decade can affect what we're doing for the NSBE mission. At the end of my presentation, there'll be an opportunity for individuals who have joined us to ask questions and or to comment. So we definitely welcome your thoughts. If you have any comments during the discussion, please don't hesitate to put it into the chat box and we will discuss it at the end of the presentation. So this discussion will begin with a discussion about economic disenfranchisement, its origins, its beginning, why is it so here in the United States, and forging a path forward. How do we move from that disenfranchisement to some accelerated growth and our economic standing in the United States and globally? In addition, we'll be discussing what the technological and economic climate is currently and where the global trends are leading us. I do want to spend some time talking about opportunities for leadership in this space. Chaos, crisis, and change often bring about opportunities, and we want to take advantage of them by one, being aware of what they are, and then also having an action plan on how to move forward. And lastly, I want to briefly discuss how to prepare organizations and communities for the change. So this being February, Black History Month in the United States, we need to talk about, how do we get here? Now, the US legislation involving freedom for individuals who had been enslaved formerly in the United States is part of the discussion with where the disenfranchisement began. So we can say at the point in which Africans were brought to America and enslaved, and their servitude that was not compensated, and also the horror and harm of slavery has impacted generations of Americans, and many of whom gave their lives for the cause for freedom and civil rights. So the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863 was signed, although there was a pre-emancipation in 1862, but the signed document came 3 years within the Civil War, the US Civil War. And so the Emancipation Proclamation did not necessarily free slaves. So everyone says it freed the slaves. Well, there were some individuals who knew about the Emancipation Proclamation and knew that they were free because the information was disseminated. But in some areas of the country, it took a while for that information to pass through, and or for some of the new policies that were surrounding slavery to end. And so oftentimes we talk about Juneteenth and other commemorative activities surrounding the freedom of slaves. So the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863 ensured that all persons held as slaves are and henceforth shall be free. And then in 1964, there was a landmark Civil Rights Act signed, which ended segregation in public places and banned discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And in this decade, this Civil Rights Act of 1964 is generally quoted and explained for how we can increase diversity and inclusion. And because it is an act and not a law, it is frequently updated and changed. So that's some of the legislation that led to what we consider legislative freedoms policies that the US government has implemented over time. So in the United States, where does your economic justice come from? So Martin Luther King is quoted as saying, "The Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity." So the point here is that what's damaging to many communities of color and minority communities is that there are economic policies which keep you from exercising your freedoms. In addition, there's exploitation of individuals who are dependent upon the economy for their own well-being and security. And then there's also negative mindsets. I want to discuss a landmark case, Shelby County versus Holder, because economic inequality is deeply rooted in policy. And although the 1963 Civil Rights Act, and now we're discussing the 1965 Voter Rights Act, does allow for some civil liberties, civil rights, for being able to vote and also to exercise your freedoms, the disenfranchisement still remains. And the disenfranchisement remains because policies themselves and legislation can be changed, especially when it's not an amendment, when it's not considered a full law. And the 1965 Voters' Rights Act is considered by many to be the most effective civil rights law ever passed. This gave individuals all the right to vote and also the opportunity for their voting rights not to be taken away because of Jim Crow laws that had been in effect, where you had to provide certain ID, you had to be able to write and read and pass certain tests that were happening, et cetera. Now, the issue that came up in the 2013 Supreme Court was about districting, voter districts. And because of that, there was some weakened minority political power when the districting was changed. And the Supreme Court allowed for states and local governments to be able to decide what those districts were. And it wasn't based upon the communities themselves, which set back some of the voting opportunities, as well as how would our vote count. And so when your vote is put into the collective and you don't have the power of the collective by the combined votes within the district, then you can't pass certain laws. And so therefore, the 2013 decision for the Supreme Court in many ways has weakened the minority political vote. In addition, the government is less responsive to minority policy demands that are requested based upon redistricting rights, because they use this Supreme Court decision to say that it's for the states or local governments to proceed. Now, there's a wonderful article, peer-reviewed article by Abaha Angie and Carlos Avancingio on disenfranchisement and economic inequality, downstream effects of Shelby County versus Holder. In addition, The Atlantic wrote an article in 2019 about the effects of this decision and how it may impact us in 2020 and beyond if we don't have new legislation and or individuals don't seek for the Voters' Rights Act to become law. And before we move into our deeper discussion about technological trends and economic trends, we also have to discuss systematic inequalities and economic opportunities. The Center for American Progress talks about structural racism. There's structural racism in federal, state, and local governments due to policy making, and this has persisted. And this has also impacted the economic well-being of many communities. In order to move forward and to eliminate some systematic inequalities, it's going to take a long-term strategy. We need to have targeted interventions to expand access to opportunities for people of color. Now, the NSBE Public Policy SIG has been discussing this issue, how we can do it, making sure that the legislation that we are able to review and provide input in has language that supports our idea that we need to have targeted interventions in this area. And that has been helpful. But oftentimes what we encounter is that individuals don't understand what systemic inequities or inequalities are, nor do they understand how certain institutional policies have affected our community long term and will continue to affect our community if not addressed. And so we're constantly starting from the beginning before we can get to targeted interventions, because first we have to justify, explain, what's happening and why it's happening, how we clearly can see it through the data. And then we also are on the other side providing input, recommendation, and advising on how to properly address the issues. So how do we move forward? I said we were going to talk about forging a path forward, where there are two schools of thought, two visions for the future that are often discussed. And the first is that we need to embrace a spirit of individualism and self-determination as a group. Now, often you may hear Black Republicans state this, but then there are some Democrats that also state this as well. And there are pros and cons to that particular mindset, because it seeks to talk about a core value where the individual has a determination on where they will go in design of their life, irrespective of external events. The other vision for the future is to design a collective vision, and that collective vision has the possibility of accelerating the closure that we see in our gaps in economics, education, and in technology. And so to look at those two visions, maybe perhaps it's a it's a duality where as an individual, you can be self-determined, but also be looking at the collective. And maybe it's not an either or, but that's a question for this group and a vision for the future that we need to commit to. Both one or the other are the two options. Now, as we discuss what's happening for 2020 and what's going on beyond, we need a good scope of where the technology is going. So Gartner has some top strategic technological trends. I'm going to review just a few. Trend number one I want to discuss is hyper-automation, which is the use of technology to automate tasks that once required humans. Trend number two, multi-experience, which replaces technology literate people with people who are literate technology. This involves multi-sensory and interfaces like wearables and advanced computer sensors. Trend number three is democratization, which means providing people with easy access to technical or business expertise without extensive and costly training. Now, the key areas here include application, development, data and analytics, design, and knowledge. Now, before I go on with additional technological trends, I want you to hone in and focus on these trends and see which of these trends are you already working in an area in your current position or in your business, which would you like to begin working towards, leaning towards, and which do you have no idea how this relates to what you're currently doing or what the future demand will be. The fourth trend that we want to discuss is human augmentation. And human augmentation is the use of technology to enhance a person's cognitive and physical experiences. Trend number 5, transparency and traceability, which is the evolution of technology. We want to create, there is a trust crisis. So increasing the liability of storage and gathering the data becomes that of companies who are taking in this data. A lot of your data is out there and someone has to be liable for its use. So this is a heavy trend. And trend number 6, the distributed cloud, which refers to distribution of public cloud services to locations outside the cloud's provider's physical data center, which are still controlled by the provider. So again, I'm going to stop here. Are you currently engaged in these technologies? That's a question. Are you interested in these technologies and also can foresee the use? Do you not have any idea of where these are going? Those are the questions. And I'm asking these questions because minority communities who are not on this trend cycle, we can see from the data that there's gaps in understanding, gaps in utilization, and gaps in education about what these trends are. But they are heavily exploited through these technologies, and the potential for them to be exploited is huge as well. They may be early adapters in some cases because they have to be. With the advent of the internet, and now they're early adapters because they're using smart TVs, they're making their purchasing power for some of the technologies that are associated with these, and therefore they're adapting to the innovation much more quickly. They're not buying into the innovation necessarily, but they are adapting to the use of it. But then they're opening themselves up to security issues and liabilities because they are not familiar with or educated about the risk. And so I just wanted to bring that up before we move into a few other technological trends. Well, the last 3 I want to introduce you to are autonomous things. Autonomous things include drones, robots, and appliances, even now ships, war vehicles, etc., which use artificial intelligence to perform tasks that were usually done by humans. Trend number 8, practical blockchain. Blockchain is a type of distributed ledger and expanding chronologically ordered list of cryptographical signed, irrevocable transaction records shared by all participants in the network. So a practical blockchain has these attributes. Trend number 9 is artificial intelligence security. Evolving technologies such create security vulnerabilities in new potential points of attack, and these are the trends that are happening in technology. These are also the trends that are creating a huger gap in wealth, education, business, and these disparities are causing communities of color to be lagging behind in innovation. But if we don't talk just about those individuals who are at the lower socioeconomic part of the spectrum, and we talk about individuals who are in entrepreneurial spaces, they also are heavily affected by these disparities because they lack access in some cases to capital, innovation, and or collaborative teams that can help move their ideas into the space. So this is also an issue. So I briefly discussed some issues that are related to these technological trends. but I want to point them out more in depthly because this is the intersection between what's leading dynamic change in our current society with regards to technology and economics and also policy. The issues related to technological trends are ethics, security, access, policy, legislation, economics, education, training, and disparities, all of which in some ways I've already preluded to. But when we talk about one technological change, you have to also think that it's affecting all of these upstream and downstream related trends and issues. And advocates, policymakers, and individuals who are entering into this space must always be considering these elements. They can consider them on an individual basis, a community basis, or a global basis. In addition, they can decide, how does this affect my business itself, or my industry, or what I'm working on in my workplace, et cetera. We're finding that individuals who are looking at disparity issues in these areas are having a hard time trying to convince others that the data that they're finding here with communities of color, that the data itself gets some traction. We're putting out a lot of information about what's happening in our communities and how they're being affected, but it's not being picked up by the larger community or majority community as an issue. And one of the reasons why is because when you're not being hurt or disenfranchised by something, then you don't see or it's not visible to you where there's an immediate need. However, those individuals who are in this space, who can see and do see what's happening, we should be committed to assisting with the change. Now that we briefly discussed technologies, let's discuss the economics that are happening. The United States economic outlook is quite healthy, according to some key economic indicators. And our current president has stated that it is his number one priority that the U.S. be a leader in the economic space, as well as in innovation and business. And so a lot of the policies that have come through the administration are to support businesses, business development, corporations, et cetera. And so because of that, we've seen some increases in wealth in some of these larger corporations, and then people who are coming in to stock markets and exchanges for the first time are now seeing more benefits. We don't know how long that will last, but the outlook in the key economic indicators are showing that right now we're pretty healthy overall. But when we look at the aggregate and subgroups and subpopulations within the United States, the story changes, particularly when we look at those individuals who are underrepresented, underserved, and are in southern parts of the US or into territories in the US. The most critical indicator for the economic outlook is the gross domestic product, which measures the nation's production output. The GDP growth rate is expected to fall below 2% and 3%, which is kind of like the ideal range that we see growth and movement between 2 and 3% often. And unemployment is forecasted to continue below the natural rate as well. Now, this data was taken from the balance, and it does provide a good idea of what some other indicators are regarding our economic outlook. So we just discussed some of the current outlook for the economy, but I want to look a little more specifically with what's happening over the next decade, because preparing for what happens in 2020 is about preparing for what happens in 2010. A decade from now, where will you be? Where will your family be? Where will your company be? Where will your organization be? And having an idea of the economic outlook will also help you to position yourself and to plan best for the year to come and the years to come. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, publishes an Occupational Outlook for each decade, which I definitely would recommend that you look at. The overall Bureau of Labor Statistics expects that the total employment will increase by 8.9 million jobs between 2018 and 2028. 8.9 million jobs is an increase. Healthcare occupations will account for 18 of the 30 fastest growing occupations, primarily due to the aging of the population. Another outlook is that computer and math occupations and those based on alternative energy production will also grow very rapidly. And there are 3 occupational groups which will lose jobs. And these include production, administrative support, and sales. These jobs are being replaced by computer and technological solutions, which we talked about some of the technological trends earlier. Retail sales will also lose jobs as e-commerce continues to predominate, and e-commerce trends will increase jobs in transportation and in warehousing. Now, knowing what the decade looks like, again, helps you to plan and create an action plan around how you're going to grow and develop your plan for your career, professional growth, and or your business or the legacy for your family. If these are the trends, then recommendations might be to invest in computer and math training that could be given to a broad group, not just those who are in secondary school, but also those who may not have attended college to provide for them technical support for additional types of education. In addition, individuals who are hoping to take advantage of e-commerce over the internet, and have a passion for an idea, this is an indicator that says that this should be a success moving forward. In addition, if you're anywhere within the healthcare spectrum, 18 out of 30 growing occupations, this is a signal that moving into healthcare in any area of healthcare service, healthcare providers, healthcare data analytics is going to be beneficial. And not just getting a position as someone who is working within one of these companies, but also starting or developing companies that are associated in this area. Now, with opportunities, there becomes a great need for leaders, and I want to take some time to talk about opportunities and leadership. So we've talked about the technological trends. We talked about what's going on, effects and outlook for the economy. So what do these trends and what do these outlooks say about opportunities? There is an ensuing change in our global economy. It's happening now. That change is getting larger and larger, and it's about global economy. So we have individuals who are not only invested in the United States, but they're also invested in China, they're invested in the European Union, they're invested in commerce and business that's in Africa. And this is diversifying their financial portfolios by country of development, not necessarily in the space of diversification that involves industry, just global diversification itself. There's a movement from profitability to sustainability, and we've seen that over the past 10 years for sure, if not 20. There are also alternative systems of value. So of course, blockchain, Bitcoin, all those things that are coming through, emerging opportunities for design and innovation, and also a greater need for design and innovation is a trend that, is a opportunity that's come along because of these trends. And also design and leadership intersections that create value. And this is the space where leaders, thinkers, change agents, and innovators are going to be needed the most. Can you figure out what's the intersection, and can you create value between what's happening and what leaders are needed in order to move the change or to close the gap or to accelerate the growth? This is going to bring about a new economy, and there are some key skills within this new economy. Number one, you will need to be able to engage with multiple and diverse stakeholders, recognize and connect with each stakeholder's competency and their value, leverage resources and activate strategic interactions as needed, mobilize diverse stakeholders towards sustainable co-created outcomes, and connect with a common purpose, especially when conflicts in existing processes emerge and often pose major barriers to progress. Now, I bring up these key skill sets because as NSBE leaders, you're working in a space where there's vocabulary for technology, there's language and communication that's happening within your organizations, your groups, your professional societies, and also in your business endeavors. This communication is not what's happening all throughout the spectrum, especially in low socioeconomic communities. They're not thinking about how they're going to get their partners all on board to leverage resources and how to think strategically about how these interactions are going to support them becoming their companies or their communities becoming global leaders and or better at engaging in what their community needs. It's just not going to happen. But for individuals who do have that voice, that understanding, they become leaders in the space and also change agents. And that's where the public policy SIG is definitely challenging its NSBE members to become advocates, and also vocal and supporters of these community initiatives and objectives that relate to technology and increasing economic status. The key skills for the new economy, when you have them and you understand them, is not just about being technically proficient. Yes, being technically proficient is important, but understanding how all of these systems relate, how the changing trends also have issues related to them, like we talked about, ethics, access, security, et cetera, and also what's coming next. So the what's coming next is very important. It could be the individual understands or has a vision for what's coming next, like Elon Musk, had a vision for that. Or it's because the individuals are tapped in, keyed in to those groups that are stakeholders and or moving the space along, meaning that they're collaborating and they're involved in those networks. So what is our advice for leaders? Number one, we need you to be unapologetic about what you're trying to do, why you're in the space doing it, and why you may come with a sense of competency, come with the competencies and the confidence that it can be done. Innovation and change are all related, and if we're going to see the disenfranchisement that we saw, that we still see today, changing anyway, or gaps being closed, we have to be unapologetic for even suggesting that we're trying to support communities that are in need. You need to connect with a mission. You need to have a clear vision for that mission as it relates to technology or as it relates to one of these trends or what we find as issues in related to these trends and outlooks. You need to commit to a plan of action. Now, myself and my co-presenter, who wasn't able to be with me on tonight, talked about commitment to the plan of action and developing a plan of action. In many cases, individuals are able to develop a plan of action, but implementing that plan takes commitment. So our focus for our advice for leaders is that you need to commit to a plan of action. Secure a network of support, very important. So this idea and advice for leaders kind of goes back to the question that we talked about. Is this going to be for you, the individual, self-determination, or is this going to be you for the collective? And as a collective, meaning building a network, are you going to see a vision that helps to accelerate the change that we want to see and accelerate the closing of the gap? Securing a network of support will help to do that. Become a leader in the space. So it's wonderful to be a leader in your community. In fact, it's quite noble when I see individuals, leading in their community. But in order to have some teeth in the game, you also need to be a leader in the space that you are championing. If you're championing closing the gap in technology as it relates to computer access, computer access for training for individuals who want to move into this area, well, you need to be a leader in that space as well, that you yourself are either an educator in it, in academia, that you have a training company, etc. Leading in the space is very important. You also need to champion other leaders. So championing other leaders takes many forms. It could be about empowering them. It could be about mentoring. It could be role modeling. And it also can be when that individual is not in the room, that you are discussing how their leadership and how their efforts can benefit others, and therefore you're championing their cause. And lastly, our advice for leaders is to propose ideas that can scale to become global. So when you are building up your ideas and you're starting to either start an initiative, a movement, a business, or expand your current business, then you want to be able to scale it and then think globally about how you can scale it globally. So a lot of times we are starting companies in our own in the United States, but there are opportunities to start, register businesses, and even receive patents in other countries as well. And I want to discuss how to prepare for change. You've heard a lot of information, and you now should be familiar with some of the technological trends and where the economy is going, and thinking, where do I fit in this space? What resonates most with me? Am I a leader in this space as well? And if so, can I create change within my current organization or within my community? Your organization being your place of business or your company, and your community being your family and your neighbors, your church, your local city or state, and also can be your community. So what's needed in this case is that individuals and the collective need to commit to accelerated growth and development. There's a lot, when you haven't done something before or haven't been successful before, you need to grow and develop. And that growth and development should not be with deliberate speed, meaning taking forever or a very slow pace. It needs to be emergent. It needs to be accelerated and catalyzed by the work that you're doing. And you need to be on top of the growth and development of the individuals that are going to be involved in the change, either through education, advocacy, changing in policy, and be unapologetic about how quickly you need the change to occur. There also needs to be a systematic and a concerted effort to change policy and legislation to increase opportunities, access, and funding support for business development and innovation. So to be a leader in this space, You have to be working multiple avenues and sometimes at the same time. That's why that network is very important, because in your network, there are stakeholders who are better poised to address specific issues. Once you know what the mission is and what the vision is going to be, then everyone can stand at their post and do the work. And that work needs to be systematic. And if it's systematic, I'm also suggesting that it be concerted, that you come up with an action plan for each of the stakeholders and they move. You also want to provide a vision of change that can captivate the minds of the current and next generation. So if you're leading in this space and you're looking at a decade beyond 2020 of the change that you want to see in the United States and are globally, so that we are closing the gap in economics and we are increasing opportunities for individuals in this space, and we're creating opportunities for ourselves in this space, then that vision needs to be very vivid, because you need something that's going to connect with the minds of the people who you want to bring on board, or who you are expecting that will begin leading that change for the future. And lastly, you want to build a microcosm of that vision and then scale it up. So this has ended our discussion. Once again, my name is Rosalina Bray. I'm the director for the NSBE Public Policy SIG Special Interest Group. And if you want to engage with our group, please send us a message to public policy director at nesbe.org or policy director at nesbe.org. There are opportunities to serve on the public policy leadership team. We have openings for a communications director, our research director, policy research director, STEM education lead, and technical director. We'll share these opportunities and descriptions of each in NSBE Connect, and you will be notified of it as well. In addition, our group will have 2 session workshops at the National Convention in San Antonio, and this will be a great opportunity for you to engage with us. And now I'm going to turn it back over to our host for comments and questions from our participants.
Thank you, Rosalina. Right now, we don't have any questions. If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat box, or you can go to the Q&A session and type your questions. Okay, we have a question that came in. Actually, he says there's no question. But the comment is, thank you so much for this. It was helpful and inspiring, especially when it seems no change is happening in large organizations we work for. So thank you for that comment.
Just to piggyback on that comment is that oftentimes we don't understand or don't see how we work in the greater narrative, meaning that we can affect change at every level in government, in our communities, et cetera. Globally, we're here and poised to do that, one, because we're alive, and then secondly, because we are privileged to have an education. I'm so excited when I meet fellow engineers or scientists who have expanded their education and are doing wonderful things in support of their community, but because they're knowledgeable, they're able to go into places and speak to people that others may not be able to, which means that they have a huge advantage. And because of that, To much is given, much is required. It's required of us to go out into these spaces and be able to be the light needed in the world in order to improve conditions for everyone. And the opportunities are there. And we don't have to accept the status quo for what's happening now. A change can happen very quickly, overnight. And we know that from what happened in the last election, so. Any other comments, thoughts? Well, before we end, I just want to thank all of you for your time. And I would like to thank the professional executive board for giving me the opportunity to present on tonight. It's always an honor and privilege to be able to share with the NSBE community, and more so because of the significance of this month being Black History Month. So thank you.
Okay, Rosalina, there were a few questions that came in, questions and comments.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll start from the top. You talked about the opportunities within the 10 years. What are some of the threats? And the second part of that question is, what are some of the limitations created by technology?
Well, I'll answer the first question. The threats to our trends are going to be what's happening globally. So right now there's foreign influence and involved in American innovation from China. There's also some, as you know, right now, the coronavirus is maybe become pandemic. Those are challenges. And then we know that we have 4-year terms for individuals who become, who lead the country, administrate the federal government administrator, who is the president of the United States. So those are all things that can affect the trends that we see, the economic trends. The technological trends are often affected by individuals who are lagging or in adopting new technology, and also whether or not those technologies are going to, the price or cost of that technology can quickly be reduced. So it may start off that it costs, hundreds of thousands, and it starts scaling down and down and down. Well, if it doesn't scale down until year 8 out of 10, then we've lost the advantage. And so that's the reason why technology changes so quickly, and companies are trying to figure out how to get their money quickly on the front end, because they know that that technology may be late in the next 3. And so that also affects these trends. Now, the second question, I believe, was about limitations. Is that correct? The second part of the question?
That is correct.
Could you read the second part of the question once again?
Sure. It's what are some of the limitations created by technology, for example, robot judges?
What was the example?
Robotic judges.
Robotic.
I mean, that's what that means.
Okay. So I think what the question, or the person who's questioning this, there are limits to the technology, and part of it is because you have human beings right now who are developing the algorithms and the systems and the electronics that are associated with these. And until the artificial intelligence and or the ability for some of these technologies to self-correct comes about, you're always going to be limited by those barriers. But it's also significant that people who are learning in this space now have a wider worldview. The one thing that I can say about diversity and inclusion is that it opens you up to different perspectives, but also when you're working on teams, you can get a breadth of knowledge that from individuals who may see things from a different perspective, which has also helped to increase, AI, use of artificial intelligence, what goes into some systems related to that, perspectives on how we solve problems, all changes because now there's diversity of thought. And so although there are limitations, I think with the increase in diversity of thought in certain spaces, you may even see that not become as limiting as once thought, because, we can be all, if all of us can work towards a common good, then we accelerate where we can go technologically and beyond.
Okay. The next request, it says, change management is difficult, and we would love any book recommendations that you may have.
So I was shaking my head when you were reading the question. Like, that's true. So change management is difficult for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's because the management doesn't understand that there are steps to change, and have not worked with organizational leaders or organizational development leaders to determine, how the best way to go about change management. So I am recommending, there is a book called Good to Great, Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't. And that's by James C. Collins. And this book looks at that aspect of, when companies are ready for change. I mean, everybody wants to, create change so they can take advantage of new opportunities, because they want to have revenues, they want to meet the bottom line, et cetera. Some do it well, some of them don't. So that's one that I might recommend. And I think that you guys may be familiar with Leading Change, which was John P. Cotter. He has a book that talks about, action plans, and we did talk about an action plan. So most organizations that are going through change management, they don't start with an action plan. And the first part of the action plan is, how does this change affect the culture within your organization? And how will we plan through resilience all the way up to ownership and acceptance of that change? So those are my two best recommendations.
Okay. Next question. You talked about the, wait a minute. That one. All right. For entrepreneurs, there are business philosophies of selling to the highest paying customers first in order to start with healthy profit margins. Given the technology trends discussed this evening, what are some policies that can prevent more of the same in terms of inequalities and inequities?
So I want to first say, some of the policies are not policies that are negatively affecting businesses in this space. It's whether or not these businesses are able to take advantage of them, and do we have enough support for businesses and entrepreneurs who are small to medium to take advantage. And I'm going to explain. So there's a small business, SBIR, CTTR programs that are supported by the federal government, which has a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And in phase 3, it gets to commercialization to help companies that are technology, innovation, and science companies, especially when they have patents or ideas that are involved in these spaces, to get them to develop through development, commercialization, and marketing. Many of these programs, although there's lots of federal funding available for it, it's not highly utilized by minority communities. And the barrier there is understanding the process and also getting help to complete the process. If you are an organization that's a machine and you're used to getting grants and funding, you can probably put in a winning proposal right off the bat. But others who are, coming into this space for the first time, they take a longer time to apply. In fact, so I work within the federal government. I also have my own company. And what we find is that the lag time between individuals finding out about some of these opportunities through attending technical workshops or regional seminars around the United States regarding the use of these grant opportunities within the government is 3 years. So 3 years before they even put in an application. So we have to accelerate that. And there's very few. So there's always a lot of outreach for there, but it's also the technical support is not there. So what I would advocate for is for the technical support to be there for companies who wish to put in for these applications. Now, the government is not going to provide you with the technical assistance that you need. So this is an open opportunity for individuals who are entrepreneurs to set up spaces, incubator spaces, and our consulting companies to assist companies that want to apply for these opportunities with completing their application. And so, again, this is an opportunity to support others who are trying to grow and develop their business and take advantage of the opportunities. So that's just one example.
Okay. There are no more questions right now.
Okay. Well, those are all pretty good. I'm excited about those individuals who are entrepreneurs or who are consulting in the space, and also developers and innovators. This is the type of discussion that many of them probably have had as a focus. And I'm just hoping that some of what I provide them with insight and some of the research our team has done will be helpful in them trying to identify where they will be in the space. But if public policy seat can help develop leaders who want to be involved on the policy aspect of this, we would definitely want to get involved in your efforts.
And then we have another comment that says, excellent presentation, looking forward to working with you. And that is Dr. Joey, am I saying that correctly? Spraggins.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Spraggins. And just so you know, Dr. Cecilia Wright Brown was going to be a presenter with us. And she's, of course, a professor at Morgan State University. I have included some of her information in this presentation, but we haven't even spoken about education or community mobilization, and how to engage specifically with the stakeholders of interest. And so this topic is widespread, and we just had to make sure that we narrowed it down on focus so that we can get it through 1 hour. But I would love to have a meeting of the minds of the NSBE family at National Convention so we can go more in depth about what we're seeing and hearing and feeling and what are we doing.
All right, there are no more questions.
Well, excellent. I believe our time was well spent.
Mm.
Well, once again, I thank you for joining tonight's call. And if you have additional questions or want to contact us, please email policydirector@nesbe.org.